Now with this week's episode of Angels of Death, episode 2, I actually think that this is going to be an episode for every person who enjoyed it. There's going to be one person who didn't enjoy it, which is a bit different than what I said last week, because I thought for every 3 people last week who watched it, 2 would enjoy it and 1 would dislike it. And I can understand if you watched this episode and you didn't enjoy it, but for me, this episode actually worked out quite well. And I know there's going to be people saying, like, I thought this was a horror anime, this was not horror in any way, shape, or form, but I would actually say this still is a horror anime, but it's a bit different. See, I think a lot of times when people think of horror anime, they think they have to be scared in order for it to be a horror series. But I do think that's true. If you're playing a video game and you're in control of the character, if you're not getting spooked, then that's not an effective horror series. When it comes to horror, when it comes to like some sort of movie or television series, so the anime that we're watching, if the characters are in a horror situation and there's very much a frightening aspect to what they're experiencing or feeling, then that's a horror series. And it still felt like that, even though there was a lot of dark comedy in this. It still felt like it had that atmosphere, but of course Rachel is now deadpan because she got emotionally broken last week after Danny said, "Hey girl, I'm gonna send you to hell where your parents are," and she had that weird vision either making her remember what happened or just emotionally scarring her to the point that she just does not show emotions anymore. So of course she's not gonna get spooked like she was in the first episode, but it's still very frightening for her character to be in this situation. But it definitely took on more of a dark comedy route, which I actually think dark comedy horror is one of the more interesting takes that you can do for a horror series, but it's not done that well often. But I will say, I think this episode did a solid job. I did enjoy the first episode more, but leaving episode 2, I'm more excited for future episodes because this has become a much more interesting series than just a girl trapped with a crazy scythe-wielding guy trying to escape. You know, now it's 2 characters who are very polar opposite, one wanting death because, in her eyes, either her family's dead or she remembered what she did or why she's there, but this guy won't kill her until he can escape. I think this is a series, now I've never played the game, but it feels to me like this is actually going to be a series not really focused on the horror aspect as the primary focus. That's going to be in the back burner. What really felt like the focus in this episode and where I think the series is going to be the relationship between Rachel and Zach, and I actually think that's a good thing. This has become much more interesting for me because I think the overall, yes, not all the comedy worked for me, and sometimes it was a little jarring, like, okay, this feels very different than the first episode, but I actually really appreciate just how sick and twisted Zach is, and obviously Rachel's not an angel either. I mean, it definitely seems like there's something wrong with her and she's probably done some sick things herself to get to where she is. Is this a prison? Is this a dream? What the hell's going on? We don't know, and I think that's exciting, but I actually really do enjoy their relationship. Now, Zach is a character you shouldn't want to root for. I mean, he's a sick and twisted murderer. No matter how bad of a past you have, it doesn't allow you to be a horrible person because, you know, you had daddy issues or, you know, you got beat as a child. Like, that doesn't excuse any behavior. But because we're in a building where it seems like everyone is a killer or messed up in their own way, and I think Rachel is just as messed up as any of the other people on this floor, it makes it worth following because it's not normalizing murder in the traditional sense. I feel like a lot of times with anime, they normalize things that they shouldn't, but with this, we're watching Zach want to kill other killers, and yes, he is trying to threaten to kill this little girl, but to me it doesn't feel like this little girl is the angel that her design might indicate she is. It definitely feels like she has her own sick and twisted natures locked away somewhere, and I expect we're going to see something down the line where it's just going to be like, this girl's absolutely insane, maybe even more insane than Zach himself. Or maybe she is just a normal girl, time will have to tell. But I have to say, personally for me, the relationship between Zach and Rachel was very engaging. Yes, it was very different than the first episode, but to me the first episode after seeing this was the outlier to really spook Rachel. But after her mind either broke or she remembered what the hell she did or how she got there, after Danny said her parents were dead, or just at least implying that they're dead and that she would meet them in hell, I think it makes sense that she was so deadpan. It is a little repetitive that she says, "Will you kill me?" every 5 minutes, but because Zach was such a wild card in this episode, his humor was it was messed up, and I really enjoyed that. I've heard some people say that this floor is one of their least favorite or something, based on what I've seen on Twitter, but I actually thought this floor was kind of interesting for how simple it was. Obviously, next week is where it's going to get more interesting, but having this, like, all these graves, seeing Rachel's name on the grave, indicating that she's going to die on this floor, there's a lot of creepiness to the overall aesthetic to this episode, and I think that's why it's still a horror series, because what the characters are experiencing, even if we have all these jokes being cracked. Dark comedy isn't something that a lot of people like, especially in a horror series, but for me, it's something I don't see done that often. Like, when I do see it done, I don't see it done that well, but for me, this is like what anime can do really well. Have such ridiculous situations, make this comedy somehow work for a horror anime. If this was live action, this would be the dumbest thing I've ever seen, but because these are drawings, the way that they can play around the expression, the lighting, the atmosphere, everything around it, it actually becomes a lot more interesting for me, and I do like this show a lot. This will not be my anime of the season. It will probably be lower on my list, but this is something after coming out of episode 2, I think I am going to review this weekly. I had a lot of fun with this. This isn't some masterpiece 10 out of 10 you're going to tell all your friends about. As it stands right now, this is an incredibly fun series that sticks out from others in the season, while also doing something a little interesting, because a lot of times when you get those horror anime, they are just trying to spook the viewer and they fail miserably, and I thought the first episode did a solid job at setting the atmosphere, but having this actually be more of a dark comedy with the horror in more of the background becomes way more interesting, and I think is going to help this series stick out from others in the genre. But let me know what you thought. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Whatever you're thinking of the episode and the series overall, let me know down in that comment section below, and if you enjoyed the video, remember to leave a like, and if you're new, also be sure to subscribe. So until next time everyone, please take care and have a good one.